Mass formation is a phenomena that occurs when we have basically four conditions. One is we don't have social connections, we don't have meaning, and many people feel what you call free-floating anxiety. And after they have free-floating anxiety, they have free-floating frustration and aggression. And when they have all those things, they can be manipulated, just like hypnosis, to one single voice that connects them. While when they are being connected again, they feel all the good things, and then mass formation is formed, and this hypnosis voice can steer them to do whatever it wants them to do. So this is a very simplistic schematic of your theory, but again, let's say that most of our viewers watch the Tucker Carlson interview. So could you please elaborate on the main important issues that I just raised?
Yes, I can. You know, indeed. So my book, in which I describe the phenomenon of mass formation or crowd formation. My book is all about the question as to how, for what reasons, a completely new kind of state system emerged in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, for the first time in history, we observe the emergence of the so-called totalitarian state. And the first two examples were the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And many people think that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were dictatorships, classical dictatorships, but that's not true. That's not true. It were totalitarian systems, and totalitarian systems are something completely different of a classical dictatorship. And if we don't understand the difference, we will fall prey to new totalitarian systems. And in my opinion, and that's what I always defended, or what I always try to show, in my opinion, at this moment, we are really at risk of ending up in a new totalitarian system. And it will not be a communist totalitarian system or a fascist totalitarian system. It will be a technocratic totalitarian system. A technocratic totalitarian system, which is a so-called velvet glove totalitarianism. That means a totalitarian system which does not so much use terror, but which uses very excessively indoctrination and propaganda. And that's my book. And what I wonder in my book is, why did this new kind of state system, this totalitarian system, emerged for the first time in the 20th century? And what exactly is the difference with a classical dictatorship? And both questions find their answer, I think, at the psychological level. Because the difference between a classical dictatorship and a totalitarian system is the fact that a totalitarian system is based on the process of a so-called mass formation, a crowd formation, while a classical dictatorship is based on a completely different psychological mechanism. In a classical dictatorship, people are just scared of a small group of people whom they experience as having a huge aggressive potential, and for which reason people just accept that a small group of people unilaterally imposes its social contract to society. But the classical dictatorship is completely different. In a classical dictatorship, what first happens is the emergence of a very specific kind of group formation, a mass formation, in which a certain part of the population, 20 to 30%.
Just a second. It's not a classical dictatorship. What you just mean is totalitarianism.
Of course. Sorry for that. Okay. Sorry for the confusion. Yes. In a totalitarian system, people fall prey to a very specific group formation, a kind of mass formation, in which 20 to 30% of the population starts to believe fanatically in a certain narrative or a certain ideology. And they believe so fanatically in it that they cannot take a critical distance from the narrative. They cannot see anymore when the narrative becomes completely absurd, they start to be willing to radically self-sacrifice when the narrative asks them to do so. And most important of all, they start to become radically intolerant for every dissident voice, for everyone who thinks differently. And that's the core of a totalitarian system, this formation of this new group, which believe so fanatically in the narrative that they are willing to report everyone to the state of whom they think that he doesn't follow the narrative strictly enough, meaning that, and I use the words of Hannah Arendt now in her famous book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, meaning that this state system has a huge secret police, namely these 20 to 30% of the population who are willing to report everyone. That's the fundament. That's why a totalitarian system has such a suffocating impact on a population. So that's the difference. And in my book, I explain why this kind of state system emerged for the first time in the 20th century. And the reason is also to be found at the level of that process of mass formation, because mass formation has always existed. But since the 19th century, the mass formation became stronger and stronger and lasted longer and longer. And in the end, it became so stable, this process of mass formation, that it could be used by certain leaders to seize control of society. And that was the reason why this new state system emerged for the first time in the 20th century, just because before that, the masses were of a different nature, didn't last as long, couldn't be manipulated as effectively, couldn't be used in the same way to form the basis of a new kind of state system. And my book focuses entirely on the question as to what reason this mass formation changed, the nature changed, why it became more stable. And that answer, I think, is to be found at the level of the view on man in the world that became dominant. Since the 19th century, even earlier, we started to believe that the universe is a kind of a machine, a mechanistic phenomenon that can be perfectly understood in a rationalist way, that the human rational thinking, rational theory should be the cornerstone of our human existence and of our human living together. And it is at that level, it is a psychological consequences, both at the level of the elite and at the level of the population, that is the reason why the mass formation became stronger. Can I put it in a nutshell, Roy? What?
Yes, definitely.
Like at the level of the elite, it was this rationalist view on men in the world, which led, and I won't go into detail, which led to the emergence of a new elite, which excessively used indoctrination and propaganda. Indoctrination and propaganda is exactly this rationalist idea that you should lead society on the basis of a rational understanding of the psychological processes in society, and then manipulate these psychological processes through indoctrination and propaganda. So I could go much further, but I won't go. I won't do it. So you have this new elite which used more and more indoctrination propaganda, and at the same time, and that's the most important thing, automatically this mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world put the population, or a major part of it, in a state of loneliness and disconnection, often referred to as the atomization of society. And once people were in this lonely state, they started to be confronted with lack of meaning making. And then once they are lonely, once people feel lonely and are confronted with a lack of meaning making, they, at the affective level, they will typically experience what you refer to as free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression. That means a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression of which people don't know where it comes from, which people cannot connect to a mental representation. And strangely enough, and it's almost something amazing, this new elite, which uses indoctrination propaganda, developed at the same time and at the same pace with this new psychological state in the population, which is exactly a state where people or sensitive and vulnerable to indoctrination propaganda. And that's why this new state system emerged, which Hannah Arendt called a diabolic pact between the elite and the masses. Because once the population is in this state, and once a narrative is distributed, sometimes unintentionally, like it can be a narrative that is just there. But once a narrative is distributed through the mass media, which indicates an object of anxiety, and at the same time provides a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, all this free-floating anxiety in the population might connect at once to this object of anxiety provided in a narrative, and people might be willing to participate in a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, even if the strategy is utterly absurd. And that's what history showed time and time again.